Hello and welcome to my capstone presentation. My name is Hannah Randall. I am a graduate student at Piedmont College, and I am also an elementary art teacher in Gwinnett County, and I have been teaching for about 6 years. I first off want to say thank you so much for everyone who is listening to my presentation and participating in my capstone committee. I truly appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this. This was a journey that I am so proud to present to you all. So, the journey to my capstone research study started with my interest in art integration. Although I am an art teacher, my personal philosophy is not that I just teach art, but that I teach and inspire through art. I use art as a vehicle to teach everything from art history to science to social studies to art skills. Because I witness the power of art in my classroom daily, it's not only natural but interesting for me to want to look more into art integration and how to spread art into other parts of my school. So, what is art integration? Art integration is when different art forms are incorporated into core curriculum. And this goes just beyond asking students to draw a picture that goes along with their writing. Art integration, true art integration, is purposeful, it's powerful, and it's meant to highlight both the art form that's being used and the lesson being taught. The art isn't just an afterthought that comes in at the end, but it's a true part of the project or unit of lessons. There are many positive effects of art integration, but these are three that stood out the most to me and that I found a lot of studies and research on. Number one, art integration has really proven to increase engagement and participation in students, whether it's through visual art, music, theater, dance. Incorporating art into core curriculums is an exciting way for students to both receive and give information. And teaching through the arts results in more engagement naturally because students are more interactive with the content. A study completed in 2014 actually measured how much students retained in a unit of study. One was done without art integration and one was done with art integration. And through this study, it was discovered that the students participating retained what they had learned significantly better than when taught without art integration. Because it's visually based, art integration often has a big impact on students that are English language learners or students who just struggle with reading and writing. It gives them a platform where they can better understand others and express themselves, and that leads to greater success and overall more confidence that the students have. An art integration study performed in 2016 actually discovered that incorporating drama-based lessons into other curriculum resulted in students that were at an underserved elementary school scoring significantly higher on standardized tests for language skills. So really, with art integration, the theory is that through various visual, musical, performing art activities, students are more engaged, they're more interactive with the content that's being taught, and they're interacting with the material in a new alternative way. And this promotes creativity, higher level thinking, and it really lets the students contemplate and process the information in new ways. This all leads to better understanding and retention in all different types of learners. So in my classroom, I just wanted to show you some images of projects where I have done some kind of reverse art integration. So I'm obviously an art teacher. So in my classroom, I'm naturally teaching my students about art skills, art history, art movements, art appreciation, things like that. But what I like to do is I like to incorporate some of their core curriculum content back into my classroom. So sort of a reverse art integration. As I said earlier, I believe that I teach through art. I don't just teach art, I teach through it. So let's take a look at this image right here in the top left. A lot of my younger grades, I like to incorporate literature and reading in my lessons. This is a project based off of the author and illustrator Mo Willems, where we looked at some of his books, we read some of his stories, and then we created our own pigeon. I believe that one of the most important jobs elementary teachers have is just instilling a love of learning and a love of reading in our students. So, whenever I can, I like to incorporate stories into my lessons. This bottom left corner image is a second grade drawing of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and second grade is actually when they start learning about segregation and the civil rights movement, and most importantly, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They learn about that in their social studies curriculum. So I love to incorporate that back into my classroom. And we do everything from read about him to I let the students be the teachers and they teach me about him, or we just talk about the characteristics he had and we make a giant vocabulary list of words that we think represent him. And we do all of this leading into the art project about him. In the middle is a lesson that I created with my fourth grade students where we incorporated math. We talked about geometry and shapes, and we talked about using rulers correctly and measuring and making things fit together. And then this right image right here, it's a little screenshot from a video I took of my students. They were incorporating their science curriculum, their fifth grade science curriculum, back into our art project. So they had just finished a unit in their homeroom classes on plant cells and animal cells. So in my classroom, they taught me, once again, they were the teachers, they taught me about plant cells and animal cells, and they created a printmaking project. So they carved plant and animal cells that were anatomically correct into styrofoam, and they used that as a stamp onto painted paper. So moving on to visual thinking strategies, this is what the bulk of my research study was about. When taking an art criticism class at Piedmont, that's when I was first introduced to visual thinking strategies. And what visual thinking strategies are is they are a method of art analysis and art criticism that really incorporates thinking strategies and visual literacy and communication skills. VTS has an ability to get students to analyze and discuss art, and that really caught my attention, and I wanted to learn more about it. Really, I wanted to study how the effects of VTS, what the effects of VTS were, and did they increase critical and creative thinking, especially compared to other forms of art criticism that I commonly used in my classroom. So VTS, it follows these steps that you see on the screen here. The students look at a work of art and the instructor has 3 specific questions. What is going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? That's a response to when students give information. And then what more can we find or can you find? And really the instructor is the facilitator, but they kind of take a backseat and they listen and they reiterate what students say, but the conversation and the discussion is really student-led and student-driven. So my study was conducted over 4 weeks with 4 separate second grade classes. And the goal of my study was to compare art criticism from the Feldman method, and to see if the visual thinking strategy method really increased my students' critical thinking, creative thinking, and overall higher level thinking. And so to do my study, I started out with a pre-critique using a common art criticism method called the Feldman method. And then I did some midweek activities, and then I ended the week with a different image, and I used the visual thinking strategies method with my students. And I wanted to see what kind of growth happened. So the image on the left, that is the image that I used for the pre-critique with the Feldman method. And this is called Spring on the Missouri, and it's by Thomas Hart. And the image on the right is what I used for the post-critique, which is what I did with visual thinking strategies. And this is a photograph by Doris Ullman, and it's named Shavir Metters. In between the 2 critiques during the week, we did some midweek activities, which I will go over in a minute. So the pre-critiqued using this image on the left, the Feldman method is a really common method of art criticism. And really it has students describe, analyze, interpret, and judge a work of art. So using the Feldman method loosely, I asked my students, what do you see in this work of art? What do you think the artist was trying to communicate? Do you like this work of art? Why or why not? And then in the post-critique with the image on the right, I followed those visual thinking strategy steps where I asked the students, what's going on in this work of art? What do you see that made you say that? And what more can we find? So the midweek activities were 2 different things. The images on the left, my students were art detectives, where they each were given a magnifying glass, and I had them break up into small groups, and they looked at the artwork very closely, and I asked them to look for clues to help them answer the question, what's going on in this work of art? So as a group, they looked at the image and they discussed that question, and then they got to present their answers to the class. What's going on in this work of art is one of those visual thinking strategies questions. The images on the right, that's the second activity where we looked at Harris Burdick's book, The Mysteries of Harris Burdick, and it's by Chris Van Allsburg. And it's a very image-based book. There's very little text, and each image is actually very different, and they tell their own individual story. There's no consecutive story going on with the images. So we did this as a group. We looked at the images in the books, and I had the students raise their hands and tell me the story that they thought was happening. And when they were telling me the story, I really wanted to push them to use evidence-based reasoning. So they had to tell me the story, and they had to tell me why. What did they see in the image that made them think of that? So let's talk about the results of my study. From the pre-critique, then we did the midweek activities, and then to the post-critique where we used the visual thinking strategies. So the results of my study were very encouraging. And as you can see, there was an increase in the length of the critique, the number of responses, and a huge increase with the number of evidence-based explanations. I saw a lot of encouraging data from this, and I also saw a lot of just overall qualitative data that was great. The quality of responses were greater, not just the time and number, but just the overall quality of responses of the post critique were much better than the pre. So during the pre-critique, when I asked the students the Feldman model question of what do you see, they really took that quite literally, and they would answer with 1 or 2 word explanations. For example, a student in class C said, I see a chimney and a brown horse and a white horse. A student in class A said, I see a lightning bolt. So these responses, although correct, they were pretty one-dimensional. They didn't really analyze the image, and they lacked using a lot of evidence-based reasoning. On average, the pre-critique, students gave brief responses that lacked details or thoughtful explanations. And looking back, I think there's 2 reasons for that. I think that the students' lack of overall critiquing experience, along with their lack of experience using evidence-based reasoning within artwork, was really the reason that the pre-critique wasn't as successful. I also think the wording, the questions I asked using the Feldman method, had played a part in that as well. So in the post-critique, there was an increase in all of the number of responses, all of the number of evidence-based explanations, and a pretty consistent increase in the critique length. As you can see, the number of evidence-based explanations the students gave more than doubled in every post-critique class, and I think this was a result of both the wording used during VTS and the practice that students had throughout the week, analyzing and critiquing art. So when conducting the post-critique and using the VTS model, I would ask the students, or I would follow up a question with them and say, what do you see that made you say that? And this was a simple prompt that asked them to show their thinking and explain the conclusions they came to. An example of this would be a student in class A stated, I can tell that this was a long time ago because their hairstyle and their clothes and the wood. Houses now aren't built like that out of wood. So evidence-based reasoning is something that students use in a lot of different classes. And a lot of times when they are reading a text or a passage and they answer a question, they have to show proof of that. They have to show where in the text or book or passage they got their answer. So during the midweek activities, I explained to the students that we are doing the same thing that they do in reading, but we're doing it visually and with an image. We're explaining our thinking and we're showing our evidence. A surprising element of this was during the post-critique, students naturally started to use evidence-based explanations or give the explanations. I had to eventually stop saying, what do you see that makes you say that? Because they were just naturally telling and sharing. I think this came with practice from hearing me ask the questions to other students, and it just became a natural thing for them, which I thought was really positive. Another thing that stood out to me during the post-critique was the increase in the quality of responses. So the shift from asking students, what do you see during the pre-critique to what is going on in the post-critique, I think that had a huge impact on pushing the initial observations into deeper thinking. When I was asking students during the pre-critique, what do you see? Like I said, they took that question literal, they answered with objects. But when I was asking them what was going on, the students were able to interpret that question in many different ways. Some still responded with the visual objects they saw, but a lot started to give more in depth answers. For example, a student in Class B explained that they think it's summer because the girls have no sleeves and the man's shirt is rolled up. So, another thing I noticed is that in the post critique, using the visual thinking strategy, a lot of students started to make more connections to their personal lives and things they've learned in other classes. So, a lot of the curriculum second grade go over, a lot of the social studies curriculum involves segregation, it involves the Cold War, it involves Martin Luther King Jr. So when the students realized that the post-critique photograph that I used, they realized it was from the past, it was in black and white, a lot of them started to make connections to those historical movements they learned about. For example, a student in Class C exclaimed that maybe segregation had just ended and they didn't want it to end, so that's why they all look mad and upset in the photograph. Another student said, I think it was a time when everyone was segregated because everybody is the same color and the photograph is all the same color. So I think it's great that they were able to make connections naturally to other things they've learned about. And examples like these display that while practicing the visual thinking strategies, students were not only making connections to their lives and history, but they were thinking critically about the visual clues they saw in the work of art. I attribute the success of the post critique partially to the midweek activities that I explained earlier as well. I think these midweek activities gave students a lot of practice with using evidence based reasoning and with finding clues that help them understand the image. I think that it helped the class just overall perform better during the post critique, and I think it played a huge part along with using the specific visual thinking strategies. This is another chart that just kind of shows how each class really over doubled, they more than doubled the number of times they used evidence based explanations in the post critique. The success was just, it was amazing. And it's awesome that I could chart it like this and really show the success in this type of format. So, as the data concludes, visual thinking strategies foster students' creative thinking, problem solving, and evidence based reasoning skills. It really improves visual literacy and it encourages students to really think critically about what they're looking at. The connections that my students made really blew me away, and I was able to really witness with my own two eyes the impact that VTS had on this art criticism. Although VTS traditionally is applied to a visual art classroom, I think VTS questions can incite deeper, more critical thinking and conversations in any classroom in any subject matter because it encourages students to think critically about an image, but they also analyze and discuss it using evidence based reasoning. The practice of evidence based reasoning, as I said before, is a skill that students can use inside the art room, outside the art room, in other classes, and really in real life problem solving situations. I have a big joy for VTS, and I think that it's a skill that I would like to share with other colleagues in my school. The fact that it fosters their creative thinking and problem solving is just one reason, but I think that showing teachers at my school the power of art integration and the power that images can have is something that I'm really passionate about. I have an opportunity next year to work with my administration and work with my colleagues to develop a professional development session for my colleagues to really show them the power of VTS and show them how they can apply it in their classrooms in reasonable ways. I think that part of the problem with art integration is the fact that you're asking classroom teachers to do one more thing and their plates are already full, and adding another thing to their checklist can seem daunting. I think VTS is a way to push art integration into other classrooms in a really easy way that's not asking a lot of the teacher. And it's something, like I said before, that's really student driven. The teacher is the facilitator, but the students really take their learning and run with it. And I think it's just a fantastic way to show how art integration isn't as scary as it sounds. And I would love the opportunity to do that and share that with my school. So this study was a labor of love for me. It was the first time I've ever done something like this, and I am so thankful that I got to share this with you, and I'm thankful that you were a part of my committee, and I appreciate you guys more than you know. I look forward to your feedback and your valuable incitement. Thank you.